Tonight, I will be talking about one of Jesus' parables about an unclean spirit. Matthew chapter 12, verse 43 through 45. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but it finds none. Then it says, "I will return to my house from which I came," and when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other more evil than itself, and then they enter and dwell there. And the last state of the person is worse than the first, so also will it be with this evil generation. Why is Jesus talking about unclean spirits in the first place? Earlier, Jesus had cast out a demon from a man. The Pharisees had claimed he was using Satan's power to do this. Jesus explained that no city or house divided against itself will stand. He also asks in verse 29, or how can someone enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he binds the strong man? Then indeed he may plunder his house. Jesus compares someone's heart to a house that is either empty or occupied. He uses the same comparison in the teaching about the unclean spirit. This means we are learning about how evil and the human heart work. There are 2 lessons we can learn from this. The first lesson, that the unclean spirit, or even just sin, is hunting you down. In verse 43, the unclean spirit is cast out of a person, and then it passes through waterless places. The spirit feels as though he is wandering in the desert, and he doesn't feel like it. He wants to be in someone. When he can't find anyone, he decides he needs to go to his old person. We see here that the evil forces are not just sitting around waiting for someone to stumble into them. They are constantly actively hunting. Sin is constantly looking for you. This means we should shield ourselves with other good things and never let our guard down. The second lesson is that we must fill our hearts with Jesus, or we will end up worse than we started. In verse 44, the spirit returned to the man's heart and found that the place had been cleaned out. The man gave up sin and got his life in order. Because it was an empty place now, the spirit realized that there is more room for unclean spirits and got 7 more of his buddies to come with him. Simply getting rid of sinful things in our life is not enough. Imagine a swimming pool. In the fall and the winter, leaves and junk blow into the pool. If you just clean out all the leaves and leave it that way, a lot of more leaves and junk will blow back into it. If you put a cover over the pool after cleaning it, it is protected from the junk. This means that we have to do more than just clean the junk out of our hearts, because we will wind up worse than we started. We have to protect it by filling up the empty space with good things. How do we fill it up with good things? Jesus said a strong man protecting it would have to first be defeated, and nobody can defeat Jesus. He must be in your heart. Another way to fill our heart with good things is to fill our mind with good things. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is any worthy of praise, think about these things." This is what repentance looks like. We empty the evil out of ourselves and fill up with Jesus and good things. Thank you for your kind attention.
Tonight I will be reading Luke chapter 21, verses 34 through 38. "And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all of them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch you therefore, and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. And in the daytime he was teaching in the temple, And at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to him in the temple to hear him.
Good evening. Wow. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Isaac, for that reading, and thank you, Silas, for your words earlier. Tonight, I also want to start by thanking Dad for giving me this opportunity and giving me this section of the Life of Christ study to speak about, and the elders for giving me this opportunity. It's been a while since I've been back. Now I'm thinking about it. It's been, I don't know, I probably only came back about 2 times this semester. It's been a long time. It's good to see everybody. But tonight I'm going to be getting to talk about Jesus speaking in the temple and the plot to kill Jesus tonight. Whenever I started looking at the verses that my dad sent over to me that I'd be talking about, I realized that there wasn't necessarily a lot written out in the Bible over them. But the more I started digging into it, the deeper I saw that it was, and the more that there was unspoken things that I found that found very interesting. First, I'd like to start by reading Luke 21, 37 through 38. And it says, "In the daytime he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and stayed on the mount called Olivet. Then early in the morning all the people came to him in the temple to hear him." For those of y'all that don't know much about what I like to do for my hobbies, I have 2 things that I will do anytime I get the chance for as long as I can, and it's play golf and watch movies. Today, we went out and played golf this morning. We were out there at 9 a.m. It was cold, rainy. Yeah, it was bad. Bad conditions, but I loved every second of it because it's one of my favorite things to do. And watching movies all the time. Like right now, actually, the socks I'm wearing, I don't know if y'all can see them, but they're Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle socks. These are my go-to dress socks. Anytime I dress up, I always wear them just because they make me happy. It's something from my childhood. Whenever we'd go to the lake growing up, there was a VHS of the old school Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that every time we'd get out off the boat, that was the first thing I did is ran over, grabbed that VHS, and would throw it in and watch it for hours. I have no idea how I never burnt out that tape, but that was my favorite thing to do. And I can promise you this, if I knew, just like Jesus did, that in the next few days I'd no longer be here, I'd be dead, that those are the things that you would find me doing. I'd be doing the things that I loved. And I think it says a lot about Jesus that he was going to the temple every day and speaking, because that's what was the most important to him. I think we can take a lot from that. But while I was thinking about what he was going to the temple to do and how it says that they were gathering in the masses by the morning, I was wondering, one, how did that many people know to gather there? What was the drawing factor for them? And what was he teaching about in the temple? So, as we know, Jesus was not a stranger to speaking in the temple. He'd been in the temple and been present in there from a very young age. As we look back at Luke 2, 42 through 47, when he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. So Jesus was obviously very impressive from a very young age. And actually, at this time, I'd like to take a little side adventure real quick. And whenever I was actually roughly 12 years old too, my parents left me at church. They got in the car, asked Dawson and Tripp, they were like, "Hey, is Reese back there?" They both turned, said, "Yeah, he's here, let's go." And I walked outside, car was gone. I can tell you my first instinct was not to go find Mike and start talking about theology of the Bible. That would have scared me very badly then. I'm not gonna lie, I'm still a little worried to do that with you now. I would get lost in about a good 30 seconds. But Jesus went to the teachers and he wanted to know more. And it's just astounding at such a young age, he was that drawn to the word, that drawn to knowledge. And I think that stories like this are what drew people to go and listen to him in the temple, is just knowing how outstanding of a person he was. And then I started thinking about what he probably was teaching about. And I started looking back and thought that it was most likely previous things that he taught about before, such as the people becoming as little children and being born again and teaching about his other sheep. But one thing that we know happened in the temple during this time while he was in there, going there and teaching, is the chief priest coming and asking him about the Great Commandment. In Matthew 22, 36 through 40, it says, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law of the prophets." I think what the chief priests were trying to do here was get Jesus to trip up, to see some type of flaw in him and get him to say something out of line that he did not mean to say. Because they had proven that they were trying to do that before, like in Matthew 21, 23 through 27. It says, "Now when he came into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people confronted him as they were teaching, and they said, 'By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?' But Jesus answered and said to them, I also will ask you one thing, which is, if you tell me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, where was it from? From heaven or from men?' And they reasoned among themselves, saying, 'If we say from heaven, he will say to us, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the multitudes, for all count John as a prophet.' So they answered Jesus and said, 'We do not know.' And he said to them, 'Neither will I tell you what authority I do these things.'" For we all know what authority he was teaching in the temples by, but he knew that if he gave that information to them, that they would use it and twist it against him. And one last thing that I want to look at before we get into the plot to kill Jesus is Jesus staying in the Mount of Olives. I think that's a really significant thing that's kind of glossed over whenever reading this. I know that at first 2 or 3 times I read through it, I didn't think much of it. But as I started looking more into the Mount of Olives, the more significant it got to me. So the Mount of Olives separates the temple and the Judean desert. And so I started wondering to myself, why would Jesus stay so far away from the temple? Like, why wasn't he staying with somebody that lived closer? If he's just going to go there, sleep, go right back early in the morning, what was the significance of it? And one thing that I stumbled across was that the Mount of Olives is also known by another name as the Mount of Anointment. And this is because of the olives that grew there. They would take the olives and make them into oil, and that oil is what they used to anoint the high priests and the kings of Israel. And I don't know, the symbolism of the king of the Jews staying in the place where they anointed all of the kings just stood out to me, that he wanted to stay there where all of that happened. And then also, it is known as a very, very powerful, prayerful place. If we look back at 1 Samuel 15:30, we see that the Mount of Olives is where King David ascended in prayer while he was fleeing from his son Absalom. He was drawn there due to his powerful connection with prayer. And then also, whenever we look, if we look at Zechariah and Ezekiel, they both prophesied from there future judgment on Israel, as well as future restoration and regathering of the exiles. Also, Zechariah describes the Mount of Olives as the exact place where the Messiah would return. And all of this, I think, just connecting the prophecy with Jesus, I just think that all of that was just very, very symbolic, very significant. And because of all of this, the Mount of Olives is one of Jerusalem's largest landmarks, and it's a very, very coveted place to go visit. All right. Now let's go into the actual plot to kill Jesus. And I'd like to start by reading Matthew 26, 1 through 5. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered to be crucified." Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who is called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, but not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. The first thing that really sticks out for me in this set of verses is Jesus proclaiming his death for the third time to the disciples. And based on the actions happening in this time by the disciples, it doesn't really feel like to me that they really grasped what Jesus was trying to tell them, that he was actually going to die in the next following days. It seems like they heard him, but they weren't listening. It was just like a passive listening. They were just along for the ride, just saying yeah, let's keep on moving, not treating it with the significance that it deserved. And the second thing that I really noticed about these verses is verses 3 through 5 is incredibly similar wording to Luke 22, 1 and 2, and Mark 14, 1 and 2. In Luke 22, 1 and 2, it says, "Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people." And Mark 14, 1 and 2 says, "Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people." Now, I know I probably just sounded like a broken record and read the exact same verse. They are the exact same, word for word. Luke 22, 1 and 2, and Mark 14, 1 and 2 are the exact same. And I think that was done for a reason. I think it was done because that's such an important part. Even though it's such a short reading, I think that it holds a lot of importance in it. And whenever I first read it, when they said that they feared the people, I thought that it meant only the Jews. I thought they were meaning that they feared an uproar from the Jews. But the more I dove into it and read more about it and read some other people's writings over it, I think that it had more to do with their relationship with the Romans and the Roman government that was ruling over them, since Jerusalem had recently been taken over by Rome, so they were under Roman rule, had to follow by their rules. And if there was at this time, because of Passover, there was a lot more Jews in Jerusalem there to celebrate the Passover feast. And if there was any type of uproar over the crucifixion, the death of Jesus, that would very much upset the Romans, who were very much about order and discipline and wanted to keep order as much as they could. So they were more worried about causing that rift in their relationship with the Romans than anything else. And I just thought that was a very, very interesting concept, since they're talking about killing the Son of God. Why are they worried about these worldly people, these Romans that are ruling over them? That was not the importance of what was happening. But as we see later on, their plan to wait till after the Passover feast doesn't happen, because God had a plan for his Son to die during that time, and that is inevitably what happens. So as we wrap up, I think there are a few things that really stuck out to me that I think that can be take-home lessons for us today. First, I think it is important that Jesus knew his fate and stuck to it by continuing to do his normal day-to-day things and the things that mattered to him while he knew that his time was running near. He continued to be the person that he always was. He continued to be godly and go and preach in the temple. And I think that is something that we can do in our day-to-day lives. We can always be better Christians. We can always show people that we are Christians and act in a Christian way that other people will pick up on. Secondly, I think that it's very significant about the Mount of Olives, about him choosing to stay in a prayerful place, in a place of deep and rich Christian heritage and background. And I think that if we, as Christians, surround ourselves with Christian people, Christian ideas, and just all around good ideas and thoughts and deeds, that we will end up being way closer with God than we ever thought we would be or could be, just by what we choose to put around us. And finally, I think we can learn a lot from the chief priests and the scribes, for they let their judgment get clouded by their positions and their ranks that they held within the Jewish faith. They let all of their power get to their heads, and they were worried that Jesus would make people see them as frauds. So they got so bogged down in what was happening in the world, and they were so worried about upsetting the Romans. And as Silas said, they had too much junk in their hearts, and they just needed to clear it out. So I think that that's something that we can remember and hold dear to us, and make sure that we always have our hearts clear of the junk and our hearts always on God. All right. Well, thank you for y'all's time and attention tonight. I know we haven't talked about any of the 5 principles of baptism, but we never want to end an assembly without offering baptism. So if you have any prayers or thoughts for the church, please come forward at this time.